Hi, Julia.
Hi, Allison. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good.
It's good to see you as always. So, we're sitting here, it's the dead of winter. It's bitter cold in most parts of the country, and it's a few weeks past the new year, and we're in that traditionally a quieter, calmer time.
Mhm.
And you recently wrote a column for us exactly about that calmer, quieter time. And you talked about how antiques can help us discover what we can learn, how the past can help inform the future, and how people around the world and across cultures have for centuries taken that quiet time to not only reflect and determine what they want for the new year, but to look around their home and approach their home furnishings and with thoughtfulness and with the idea of repair and renewal. And I just thought that was so interesting about how furniture comes into play at this time of the year. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. So this actually started, while I was writing the column for you guys, I was, simultaneously writing a Substack article, and that was on, again, kind of this quiet reset mentality that we're in and what that looks like. And it was about being kinder to ourselves in general, right? It was about, we can't have the same expectations for ourselves as we do maybe in the late spring or the summer months, because the days are shorter. And it is it's a perfect time. Our energy is usually a little bit lower. And we're going into that re-entry of the year after the holidays. And sometimes it can be a difficult time, but there's such a wonderful opportunity during the post-holiday season, especially January, February, to reset on so many things, and that looks different for everybody. So, and this is a global, this is a global mentality. It's a global historical, it's deeply tied to how people evaluate what they live with. So I was thinking of all of these things, and of course my mind naturally goes to how does that correlate with our relationship with antiques and furniture and case goods and all of those things in our industry. And then also we've got this dichotomy, right, of markets. Like, this is
Right.
it's a quiet season, and
But it's
yet,
also an incredibly busy season for the
right.
industry, right? And
Yes. And
how do you reconcile this appreciation for what's old with this need to also consider what's new and how those two things fit together?
absolutely. And so I feel that reset doesn't mean retreating from buying, right? It means buying with clarity and confidence. And historically, the moments of reset have really always coexisted with active trade. And again, with the economy being what it is and the ebbs and the flows, um, we can never really take you can't, the designers, like, and the brands and the makers, we can't take an entire season to reflect and reset. You've got to keep going, you've got to keep
Right.
pushing. And so I feel that this is such a great time to again go into those markets and to go into that season, um maybe looking more for, it's about getting better and not just about more. And I think our designers do that already. They're so in tune with what their clients want and the lifestyles, and then also what the brands are doing. But it is an opportunity too to look at antiques not as nostalgic objects, which they are, but also as really like kind of existing living examples of longevity, craftsmanship, intentional decision making. And then taking that and going to those markets and being also intentional with the decision making of what you are looking at and what you are committing to whenever you go to market.
Right. Because what you buy today, 50 or 100 years from now will be an antique for the future generation.
It will, and that is so in the article it really talks about how we use, all across the world. And it was done differently, of course, in different areas and regions, but it was the time that families, because they weren't out, farming, and they weren't out doing things, the weather was too bad. So they were kind of inside, and this was the time to repair. It was the time to look at, we need to refresh this, or this needs to go. It was that time to purge and start fresh for the new year. There's such strong symbolism. January offers such strong symbolism. Really, if you think about it, it is just the flip of a page in the calendar.
Right.
However, that's not how we treat it, and I think that's wonderful. Um, so that's what people did, is that they, it wasn't about everything new, but it was kind of what does go out and what can be fixed, what can be restored. And the things that stayed, the things that made the cut, if you will, those became antiques. And they were usually the things that were made very well. They had form and function. And we see that now. So um, the brands that I had mentioned in the article, both Hickory Chair and Jonathan Charles, I feel like they do really they do uh, this justice, if you will.
Right. Right. Yeah, I thought that was so interesting. You mentioned about how they would like tighten joinery on,
Mhm.
you know, didn't different wooden pieces, or they would um, take care of textiles. And I know you had some really great examples of exactly how they would repair and reconsider the pieces that were in their homes.
Yes, they're doing a lot of different things. So medieval Europe, I think I talked about how they're, yes, repairing furniture, mending textiles, and also they're restoring objects. In Japan and China, I talk about how they're rehanging scrolls, interior, exterior, and they're also everyone's polishing and scrubbing, and not just a purge or a spring cleaning, but really it's they're refinishing things, they're reinforcing things. And that was done all over. That is one of the ways that they kind of like commemorated this season and their life.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, so, and then they thought about those decisions, what deserves to stay, what can be repaired, what do we want to keep in our home, what's going to make it, and what needs to go out. So I thought that was really cool that, yeah. And then the other thing I was thinking of when I was writing about this and researching it was, think of all of the trades and also the innovations and the designs, um the what's the like the jobs, I guess, and the different craftsmanship and artistry that were
Different
developed
skills. Yeah.
during this time, the
Mhm.
skills, thank you, the skills that were created during this time. Someone's looking at something and they're like, oh, how do I repurpose this? And then
Right.
all of a sudden these really cool ideas start, being generated and spreading across village to village, things that had never been done before, that sometime today, people do them in a factory, but it was really cool. They just started them. They're like, I want to figure out how to reuse this more or better, or how do you, create, if with textiles, how do you reuse them? Or draperies was not always a thing, but then all of a sudden it was.
Goes to show we've always been in periods of renewal and change, of course, right? As we face so much technological change now, it's comforting in a way to know that, you know, people have always faced major change and have had to adapt and change course and adjust.
You're 100% right. And I don't think we think about it that way. I think because life moves so fast now, that we just feel that we're in this constant state of change. Um, but I think it's relevant to the time period that you're in. So, a couple of hundred years ago, without the technology that we had, things were still changing so fast, but it just didn't feel as fast because they didn't have the communications and the media and things to kind of like further that along.
Right.
But yes, I mean, imagine like one day you're doing something this way and the next day a hand tool is developed. We don't think about that as being this huge change, but it obviously would have
But it
been.
but it was right. Right.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm also interested, prior to writing the article, you had suggested a few other themes that were that are important at this time of the year with regard to home furnishings, such as like what type of pieces people would move front forward at this time of the year, such as writing desks.
I think that this time of the year, and everyone's different. Everybody has different hobbies and interests, but I feel that this is when we get to maybe spend a little bit more time with those hobbies and interests. And so for one person, it may be a writing desk, or if you're an artist, you're going to have a certain kind of, table, an art easel, what have you, and you're creating spaces. I always like in my home, I am always creating a new nook or a new corner, and saying, oh, I'm going to do this hobby. And then I learn about it. And then I'm like, okay, I'm done with that. And then I turn it into a nook for another corner, another hobby. Um, but yes, and also this is a time I think that, fireplaces are on more. So
Right,
there's
right,
more attention to maybe what the mantle looks like. I think it's a really good opportunity that people take to delve in. Maybe it's more reading nooks. I think that people
right.
do get the opportunity to read more during
I
these
agree. Yeah,
colder months. If we're not as much, outside as much, or we're not on the go with vacations and things like that. It's kind of, and let's be honest, we've all spent so much money during the holidays that we need to be a little bit more homebody at this rate.
exactly, exactly. Let's just dial it back a little bit. Stay at home, more stay at home evenings.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, I think so too.
You're getting out those woolen clothes or those sweaters more, so you're going maybe into a gentleman's chest more often.
Hmm.
Um, you or different, like maybe using the valet stand more, like I don't, so there's just pieces that I think people they think about during the winter months that they don't think about when it gets warmer.
Sure, sure, that makes sense. My grandmother used to change all of her furnishings around according to the season. So she would, when in the warm weather came, she would take down drapes. She would literally roll up rugs, roll up wool rugs, and replace them with jute rugs. It was just this visually lighter, cooler feeling, and that was some um, a seasonal routine that she had. I mean, her home never stayed static. It was she would always be changing it up again in tandem with the season, with the weather, you know, with boredom maybe.
Right? No.
Yeah.
And I also think from a decor perspective, I think we bring in more greenery during the winter months because it's either brown or white depending on
Right. Right.
where you're living and what your climate is like. But I think people try to bring in more greenery to kind of bring the outdoors in, and a little bit of color because it
Right.
can be drab. I think that, candles are definitely something that, and so therefore beautiful candlesticks and candle
Right.
holders. But we do decorate differently. We think about things, I want lots of cozy throws and throw pillows to be around. And that's, not something I obviously think about when it does get warmer in the spring and summer.
Sure. Sure. A
But
good
you had mentioned,
opportunity.
yeah, go ahead.
I was to say a good opportunity for retailers to bring those types of items front forward. And of course, so many of them do such a great, great job of that. But it just reinforces the idea that how do you touch upon what we all crave at this time of the year?
Yes. And you had touched on like draperies. And I do think that
Mm,
that's something too. Not only are we, wanting more light to come in, as the days are shorter and maybe
right,
it's not as bright. So people might opt for a different type of a shade or blinds or something, whether it's plantation or Roman or something. But then the draperies, you start to see they're getting faded over the summer. So in the winter, is that the time that, people update their draperies? You talked about your grandmother. That might be one of the reasons that she had done it, is because she's like, okay, it's, the fabric is fading. So I
right,
need to
right.
I need to replenish that, refresh that.
Exactly, exactly. That's where the slip covers come in.
Oh, absolutely. And not the plastic that my grandmother had on the um it's funny that, and I think this is, we just don't think about these things, you know. It's just, this is part of life and you go on with the decisions that you make, but there's so many reasons behind those decisions. And so it kind of comes back full circle to, you know, the reset and the renewal of the season, and how as designers and brands are at market and they are creating those relationships and they're looking at trends, and they're looking at what people gravitate towards historically during the season. And I think that that obviously affects what they're going to have in their showroom.
Sure.
Um, and then what do you know, the designers, they're looking for things for their clients that are going to last and not just, you know, be out the door next year. Um, so yeah, I think it all ties together. But it really is, even though it is a quiet time and it is a fantastic time to kind of look around, it's also, it's a great time to look at what does need to be refreshed and what new needs to come in. Um, yeah.
Yeah, a real taking inventory, like almost literally
Yes.
taking inventory of your home and saying, what do I need? What do I truly need? What do I want?
Mm-hmm.
Um, what can I use? What can be reused? How, and again, and as you said, how do you blend what's old with what's new?
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And antiques are so helpful. Um, Antiques and markets, so like the retail and antiques, are not in any way opposed to each other, right? They do actually, they work together, not as competition. You know, antiques are contextual anchors. They're not positioned as alternatives to retail, but they can help designers evaluate new product by asking really great questions and looking at materials, construction, proportion, and lifespan. So this benefits those brands whose work stand up to that scrutiny. And I think that's where, you know, I had brought in the hickory chair and the Jonathan Charles Pine furniture, because I think that they do a really good job of that. Um, and then markets kind of, you know, going to that next level, they help filter the noise. And
Mhm.
then instead of
Mhm.
overwhelming buyers with, you know, excess, I think that they can help identify what is truly relevant for the year ahead.
Yes, I always love the perspective that that you give us, that historical background, um, that story that carries forward into all the things that we, seek out and use today. So I thank you very much for that. I look forward. I know you're going to have a column for us in March, and maybe we'll have some more conversations in April as we get closer to High Point Market. But I look forward to talking to you about all those things.
Same. Thank you so much, Allison. I've really enjoyed this.
Yes, me too. Thank you, Julia.